Welcome to Lesson 24 in our study of the book of Revelation as a part of the prophecy series. Today we're going to move along into the text up to chapter 17. Now, if you remember, in our last lesson we looked at the bowls of divine wrath. And when we saw the final bowl poured out, that great earthquake and the other natural disasters, the heavy hail that has never been seen before, it was very much implied that this was the end. And it's very much what's happening just before the return of Jesus Christ. However, when we come to chapter 17 and chapter 18, we're going to see the fall of Babylon described in two different ways. Now, this isn't in addition to the fact that chapter 16 basically said that was the end. This is actually probably an explanation of what has happened during this series of judgments. We're going to see, especially with today, the text showing us the destruction of the great whore, and then what we're going to see in chapter 18 is the destruction of the kingdom of the beast, the great city itself. So let's take a look today. We're going to focus in on chapter 17 of Revelation, verses 1 through 18, the fall of Babylon, part 1. So we're going to take a look at this in several parts that the text is going to show us. So what we want to focus in on first is Revelation chapter 7, verses 1 to 6, the harlot and the scarlet beast. The harlot and the scarlet beast. So let's take a look at the text and notice what it is saying. Here's what verse 1 says. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and with the wine of whose sexual immorality the dwellers on earth have become drunk. And he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness. And I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. And on her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes, and of the earth's abominations. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus, and when I saw her, I marveled greatly." All right, so let's take a look at this. We're going to divide this first part into several sections. And what we're going to notice here, first of all, is in Revelation chapter 17, the first part of verse 1, the invitation of the angel. So let's look at this together. And what we're going to notice is this, that there's an angel. It was one of the angels that was a part of the 7 bowls of divine wrath. One of the angels invites John to see the destruction of the great whore. Now, a very common question at this point is, who and what is the great whore? We've never seen this in any part of the scripture, George. Can you give us an understanding? Well, let's focus in on several things. The great whore in the book of Revelation has provoked much discussion concerning her identity. In fact, when I say much discussion, I'm talking about centuries of discussion. The passage refers to the whore of Babylon as a mystery, means we cannot be completely certain as to her identity. Now, that's a point that you and I are going to need to remember, especially when we get to folks who have tried to identify her through the centuries. It's a mystery. It's kind of hard to understand who she is. The passage does give some clues. Now, there are some clues in the passage. Now, some have been misunderstood, but we're going to take a look and try to ascertain as to who she is. Revelation chapter 17, verse 9 explains, "This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are the 7 hills on which the woman sits." Now, in the text, it's telling us that she's sitting on the back of a beast who has 7 heads. Now, the text tells us that the 7 heads refer to 7 hills. Now, from that, here's what happens. Some scholars link this passage with the Roman Catholic Church because in the ancient times, the city Rome was known as the city on 7 hills because there are 7 prominent hills that surround the city. Now, this was a very popular viewpoint that the Roman Catholic Church was the great whore back in the time of the Reformers. When you think about Luther and Zwingli and Calvin and so forth, during this time and after that time, people were saying that the great whore is the Roman Catholic Church. However, when you get to Revelation chapter 17, verse 10, it goes on to explain that the 7 hills represent 7 kings or kingdoms, 5 of which have fallen, one that is, and one that is to come. So it can't be Rome. So therefore, the whore of Babylon can't refer exclusively to Rome because these 7 hills aren't literally 7 hills. They're kingdoms. And 5 have existed at one time and they no longer are. 1 exists now and 1 will be future yet coming. Now, when we look at Revelation 17:15, it tells us, "Then the angel said to me, the waters you saw where the prostitutes sit are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages." So when it says she sits on many waters, it's talking about peoples. Therefore, the whore of Babylon will have great worldwide influence over people and nations. Again, when we consider Revelation chapter 17, verses 10 through 14, it describes a series of 8 and then 10 kings who are affiliated with the Antichrist. So the whore of Babylon will at one time have control over these kings. Revelation chapter 17, verse 18. And at some point, the kings will turn on her and destroy her. Revelation chapter 17, verse 16. So we can gain a partial understanding of her identity. The whore of Babylon is an evil world system controlled by the Antichrist during the last days before Jesus' return. And so what we can see from this is this is not necessarily something that exists today, although there may be some foreshadowings of it. But we're not in that tribulational period right now. We've talked about that before. This is obviously a system that exists during that 7-year reign, that 7-year period of tribulation in which the Antichrist reigns. So the whore of Babylon also has religious connotations. Spiritual adultery with the beast being the focus of the ungodly end-time religious systems. And it all is focusing on worshiping the beast. Now again, we don't see that today. So let's get right back into the passage. Now some of the things that we've talked about with regards to the great whore, we're going to see a little bit more in depth as we get into the passage. So let's focus in for now on Revelation chapter 17, the second part of verse 1 through verse 2. We see the influence of the harlot, the influence of the whore. So first of all, when you look at the second part of verse 1, she has a geographical influence. Now, what do you mean by that, George? Well, this woman symbolizes the religious system of Babylon. Babylon. Now, let's stop for a moment. Babylon is around 600 to 500 BC. So we're talking about over 2,500 years ago. And so you're saying there's a religious system from Babylon that still exists in the same way today? No, I don't want you to think in terms of world religions. I want you to think in terms of control, spiritual control used by kings over the people. And you see that even to this day, where kingdoms and governments will focus in on a religion as part of the control of the people. So this woman symbolizes a religious system of control that has existed since Babylon. She will have influence over peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. So this woman is far beyond just any kind of religious system like in an area. But this has implications of more than that, almost worldwide. Well, when we get to chapter 17, verse 2, we see her political influence. She has great political influence. What do we mean by that? Well, the political systems of the world will embrace her. Now, again, let's remind ourselves, that's not true today. We have nations that embrace particular religious systems, but they're not all doing that throughout the world. This is during that tribulational period. There will be a system, a religious system that is represented by the whore that the political systems of the world will embrace. Now, when we come to Revelation chapter 17, verses 3 through 6, we see the vision of the harlot. John has a vision of this harlot. He is taken to see her. Now let's take a look here. So when we come to the first part of chapter 17, verse 3, we see that John is taken to the harlot. What? He's taken to see the harlot in a vision. The text says, in the spirit. So it's not like he's physically taken to her. He sees her in the spirit, in a vision. Again, when we come to chapter 17, verse 3, the second part through verse 6, we see the description of the harlot. We're going to see how the harlot is now described as John sees her. And there's several things that pop out here. So first of all, in Revelation chapter 17, verse 3, the second part, we see the harlot, the whore, is sitting on the beast. So what does that mean? Well, the whore is supported by the Antichrist. Now, how do you know that it's the Antichrist? Well, look at it. It is described as having 7 heads with 10 horns. If you remember, this is the description of the beast, having 7 heads with 10 horns, the Antichrist. Notice now it describes what she's wearing. When we get to chapter 17, verse 4, notice her apparel. We're going to see how she is clothed. So the whore is adorned in the trappings of ritualistic religion. In fact, it is the description of the colors that she is wearing that those who hold it's the Catholic Church seem to point to as a proof that this is the Catholic Church. Now, that is actually not necessarily correct, because those very same colors are used by many religions throughout the world. But again, remember, this is a religious system that has its roots going back 2,500 years throughout the world to control people. This is a religious system that is during the 7-year period. And so this is how she's described. Now, when we come to chapter 17, verse 5, we're going to notice the name on her forehead. Now, again, does she have a literal name on her forehead? Maybe, or maybe this is symbolic, but the character of the whore is revealed in her names. When we talk about names in the scripture, they often reveal the character of the one who is named. And so with this one, she is called Babylon the Great. Now, what we're also going to see when we come to chapter 17, verse 6, is that the whore is drunk on blood. Now, what do you mean by that? Well, the whore is responsible for the death of true believers. And notice that the text itself tells us specifically who she is drunk on, who she has killed. And what I want you to notice is that this whore has killed the blood of the saints, that is, those who have trusted in the Lord Jesus throughout the centuries, and the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. That would be in particular those who have died during the tribulational period. So what we see here is this woman is responsible, this system is responsible for the death of the saints, of believers, and she will be held accountable. Well, that brings us now to our second section of chapter 17 that we're going to focus in on. Let's look at chapter 17, verses 7 through 14, the significance of the harlot. We're going to see the harlot's significance that is preeminent during this tribulational period. So I want you to notice with me what verse 7 says. But the angel said to me, why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast with the 7 heads and 10 horns that carries her. The beast that you saw was and is not, and is about to rise from the bottomless pit and go to destruction. And the dwellers on earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will marvel to see the beast, because it was and is not and is to come. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. They are also 7 kings, 5 of which have fallen. One is, the other has not yet come. And when he does come, he must remain only a little while. As for the beast that was and is not, it is the 8th, but it belongs to the 7, and it goes to destruction. And the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received royal power, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour, together with the beast. These are of one mind, and they hand over their power and authority to the beast. They make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them. For he is the Lord of lords and King of kings, and those with him are called and chosen and faithful. Okay, so let's take this second part that we're looking at here in chapter 17, and we're going to look at it in several sections. So first of all, let's focus in on chapter 17, verse 7. The angel reveals the whore's significance. Now, obviously, this whore has some sort of significance, and here's what we're going to see. The angel will explain the meaning of the whore and the beast. The meaning of the whore and the beast. Now, before we launch into what he's going to share, have you noticed when we read the passage, most of what he talked about wasn't about the whore, but rather the beast. Have you noticed that? And the influence and the actions of the beast. So let's take a look. So when we look at Revelation chapter 17, verse 8, we see the beast here. So what I want you to notice is this. The beast will be empowered by Satan. Now we've already seen that in other passages. The beast will receive his power from Satan. He will have influence over the world. We already know that as well from the other passages that we've looked at before coming to chapter 17. Now, again, remember I mentioned to you that it says that the whore is seated on 7 hills. Well, these 7 hills have meaning, and we're going to see that in chapter 17, verses 9 through 10, the 7 empires. So what I want you to notice is this. The whore is supported by 7 kingdoms or governments. It's supported by 7 kingdoms or governments. Now, the text tells us this. 5 empires have passed. Now, what empires would they be? Well, Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, the Medo-Persian Empire, and Greece, the Greek Empire, which was then started by Alexander the Great and then ended up being divided among 4 generals. And this is the 5 that have passed away, that no longer exist. The writer, John, then points out that the current king is ancient Rome, which would be during the time that John is writing. He's writing about that the 6th kingdom is the current kingdom, which is ancient Rome. But the 7th kingdom, there is a future world empire. Now that's the reality. There is a future world empire. We've seen that in other prophetic texts, that there is this empire to come that will have influence and rule in the world. Now, when we come to chapter 17, verse 11, we're going to talk about the 8th king. The 8th king. Now, what do you mean the 8th king? Well, this is an additional king compared to the rulers of these other 7 empires. The Antichrist is the 8th king. He is the beast. He is the one. But notice, he is also referred to in the text as being the 7th, a part of the 7th kingdom, the 7th empire. Now, that brings us to chapter 17, verses 12 through 14, where we see the future 10 kings. Now, this is beyond these 7 empires. This would be future governments or future rulers during the tribulational period. How do we know that? Well, the text tells us several things. So first of all, the future 10 governments will support the Antichrist. So the world will have 10 empires or 10 governments that are regionally in the area. These are regional governments, and they will support the Antichrist. These governments will make war on the followers of the Lamb. And again, we know the Lamb is Jesus. So these governments will persecute and make war on the followers of Jesus. Well, that brings us now to our third part of the text that we're looking at here in chapter 17. And that's the text we're going to look at in chapter 17, verses 15 through 18, the punishment of the harlot. We're going to notice now the punishment of the harlot. So I want you to notice with me what verse 15 says. And the angel said to me, the waters that you saw where the prostitute is seated are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. And the 10 horns that you saw, they and the beast will hate the prostitute. They will make her desolate and naked, and devour her flesh, and burn her up with fire. For God has put it in their hearts to carry out his purpose by being of one mind and handing over their royal power to the beast, until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman that you saw is the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth. Now, let's take a look at this. We're going to see several things here. Notice with me chapter 17, verse 15, the waters that she sits on. So again, the whore has authority over the peoples of the world. So this religious system will have authority over peoples throughout the world. However, when we come to chapter 17, verses 16 through 17, we're going to see that the whore is betrayed. Betrayed by who? Well, the kingdoms of the world will turn on the whore and destroy her. So at some point during the tribulational period, these kingdoms, these 10 kingdoms will decide they no longer need this system. And so they will destroy the system. They will destroy this harlot. Now, when we look at chapter 17, verse 18, the final thing that we're going to look at here is the nature of the woman. And so, just so you understand, the whore is a great city of influence. A great city of influence. Now, this is the amazing thing. So it's not just a religious system, but it's a city that exerts worldwide influence. And that's going to make sense as we get into the next lesson when we come to chapter 18, when we see the fall of Babylon part 2, because there we're going to see the destruction of this great city in one day. So what we focused on in chapter 17 has been the religious system that has been supporting the Antichrist, that has existed for centuries upon centuries and used to rule over people, is brought to destruction. We're going to see now that great city is ultimately destroyed. The kingdom is destroyed in the next lesson.